In this episode of the Late Break Show, this is an update on my Austin Allegro Sleeper project, all about the engine build, the Civic Type R engine build. If you haven't seen the previous episodes explaining what this project is about and how we've got to here, I highly recommend you go above and look at the playlist. So the first step of an engine swap is obviously finding the right donor engine, and in this instance I contacted Synetiq, who are a worldwide salvage company, and they managed to source a Civic Type R that was running and driving and suitable to be a donor. I went up there and collected that, and if you haven't seen it, I did a Ford E-Transit review video where I went and collected that and took it down to Luton to Phil at Dream Automotive. You can buy these parts via Synetiq's eShop, synetiq.co.uk. Parts are covered by a 30-day guarantee minimum. You can typically get a hell of a good deal compared to brand new components, and as someone that's a big fan of reusing used parts when they're in good condition rather than binning them, this really appealed to me. So you've seen where this engine originated from. You know it came to Phil at Dream. Phil has spent quite a long time putting together the engine, stripping it, checking it, and we're just going to go through a summary of what you've done with the engine whilst putting the finishing touches on it. Yep. And they really are the finishing touches. The gold bit on the top, beautiful painted valve cover, disguised as an Austin, that was done by JBM Auto Dips. Thank you, John. So you carry on. Yeah. I'm just going to ask you a few questions, really, because I know you've spent a long time doing this. Yeah. So really the point of this engine was, we knew it was running and driving. It came out of a car that was okay, but we also knew that the intention for my project Agro was to always turbocharge it, go higher in terms of performance, but not crazy high. So the sort of the ceiling of performance that we've anticipated is about 400 horsepower, but a drivable 400 horsepower, and that's what's been in the back of Phil's head the whole time, right? Yeah,
so what we've done is effectively just a refresh. So we haven't gone oversized on anything. The pistons are the original pistons, original rods, and it's just new rings, new bearings, recut the valve seats, so it's going to have good compression and it's going to be solid. So
what did you find when you said, because you stripped the engine down within about 24, 36 hours of me dropping it off?
It was pretty quick. It's easy to take engines apart. You know, it's nuts and bolts, they just sort of explode apart.
So can you go through the sort of procedure of how you did that? Because I know, thankfully, we captured all of the processes of it, the strip down and the build back. And the great thing about the K20 is obviously it's a very resilient engine. Yeah. We know it can be turboed.
These go in many cars, turboed, supercharged, NA. Yeah. So obviously we spoke about those options as well, whether it went to even a K24. But to get the car going, we've agreed that it was probably best just to stick with where we're at, not go too much on the boost. No. It was going to be turbo. I think that was what you were favouring.
I think we wanted to go turbo. Adam was keen at FabCo to go turbo anyway. And I think these engines seem to turbo really well. Yeah.
Yeah, like on standard internals, they'll take them 350, 400 quite comfortably.
That's amazing. So, I mean, it's bonkers, really. So I thought, I mean, like Phil just said, the K24 idea is a sort of Frankenstein of the 2.4 CRV engine, is it? And the
Accord engine.
Accord.
What we use, yeah.
And then the obviously the Type R Civic engine, kind of taking the bigger capacity bottom end with the VTEC top end. In the future on this project car, we can always change the engine, modify it.
Yeah, it's easily done.
He's already said, what are you going to do after this iteration? I'm like, well, let's just get the car on the road, bed it in, finish it, and then see what happens. So, strip down.
Strip down, yeah.
When you stripped it down, what's part of the process? What did you do?
It's effectively just get it into as many parts as I can and clean them up, and then start looking at them thoroughly, seeing can we see any wear or cracks or indentations, anything like that. So it's just a good thorough clean up and inspection, really. Do
you professionally clean the bits, or do you just clean them?
Some of it would go into just a wash tank, just with a solvent. It'd usually go through there, blown off with air, and then maybe brake clean it down. And then by that point it's pretty clean. For the actual block, we went through that process, but then it went into a hot wash tank.
Okay.
And then it was wire wheeled as well, so we scrubbed off any sort of dirt that had been left on there.
Yeah.
And that was really because it was being painted.
Yeah.
And we want the paint to stick to it, so it had to be a good base, really.
First, we've got the engine onto the stand. Now, I'm going to set about getting some of the ancillaries off. We'll get the inlet and exhaust manifolds off, moving around to like the alternator, water pump housing, and the aircon pulley at the bottom there. Aircon, obviously, we won't be reusing again, so there's be parts that will be going off straight off to the bin, other parts that will be getting a bit of a refurb, clean up, maybe even replating. But initially, I'm going to start off on the engine loom, get the engine loom off, and that'll give me access to a lot more bolts. But in general, looking around the engine, it looks pretty clean and tidy to start off with. There's no signs of oil leaks, or the liquid gasket looks to be in one piece, and I can't see any damage around the engine, so all in all, it's a good start. So got the loom off the engine now, and I can start to get around to a few more pieces. Looking here to start with on the exhaust manifold, it's actually been cut around the cat area here, and some of the heat shield here is already rusted apart, so we probably won't really fight with this too much. We'll just pull it off and just get it out of the way. We're going for a turbo engine after all, so there's going to be no need for this anymore. This particular Z4 engine comes with a balancer shaft style oil pump. So it's something I'll speak to Jonny about, but in previous builds we'd usually do away with this and put on an EP3 or an FD2 oil pump and pickup, using also their sump as well. It's just a little bit less drag on the engine, you're not having to spin two shafts in here, and it's just a singular pickup for the oil. That's the block stripped bare now. So I'm going to get this into the back of the car and head over to the machine shop where they'll put it through the wash tank, and then once it's nice and clean, we should then be able to inspect properly and see exactly what work we've got installed.
Now I've gone for a simple gloss black finish on the block. We did talk about other layering colours, white. The downside to black is that you can't see any oil leaks. Yeah. The upside to black is that it's neat and it plays things down. So because it's an Allegro Sleeper, and because there's a bit of tongue-in-cheek with the Allegro, the Austin, and a few other bits that we're trying to put on in. For example, I'm going to try and put this oil filler cap, which is from a Triumph Dolomite Sprint with the Leyland roundel on it, a nice little aluminium cast unit. We're going to try and get that machined and maybe welded so it can work on there. So obviously it is a Honda engine, but am I right in thinking that all Type R motors are UK made? Or were?
Ooh,
I mean, obviously the one that's about to be launched is Japan made.
Yes, the one it was Japan made, the latest one.
But
I don't know if I could commit to saying they were all.
EP3?
The cars were built in the UK for sure.
Okay, but you don't know if the
but
engines...
I don't know 100% whether all the engines were built here.
Okay.
Some of them were.
Yeah.
But I couldn't say if all of them were.
Yeah. But there's definitely a strong relationship between British Honda Type R manufacturer. So in a way, in a really convoluted way, I'm not going to lie, it's still British. It has a British element to it, just like the Austin Allegro.
So I'm over at the machine shop now, and the cylinder head's already been through the wash tank a couple of times to get it cleaned up. So I'm going to start on removing the valve springs, take the collets out the back there, get the spring out, and then I can start to inspect the valve seat around the bottom. The valve will depend really on how much carbon is built up on that seat as to whether we start any machining on this cylinder head or even potentially replacing the valves. So a slight bit of pitting on this valve, got a few little dark spots around there, but we'll have a look at the valve seat itself as well, because that'll be the bit that need remanufacturing. This will probably get ground bound into the head itself. So now that I've got the valves out of the cylinder head, I can see on the backs of the valves there wasn't too much pitting on the back side of the surface face where it can contact with the cylinder head. The exhaust, you can see, looked a little bit burnt up too, but nothing I don't think wouldn't clean up on those. In regards to the cylinder head though, you can see there's a lot more pitting around the exhaust sides here, so that's something that we're definitely going to need to recut the valve seat on if we're going to be looking for a good solid compression on this engine. So again, this will go for another clean now, and then we'll look at starting to reface these valve seats. So moving back over to the cylinder block now, we've been taking out some initial measurements of the block. So first we'll be measuring down the centre of the bores to measure for any straightness or any ovality that's starting to appear. Looking for any distortion as well, and this will all sort of come out once we get the numbers together, that you'll start to see a pattern appearing. But it's all looking good at the moment, and like I said from previously, the engine looks tight, it looks like it's been sealed up well, it's looked like it's been well maintained. So I don't really think we're going to be having much problems here.
On the head itself, we've recut valve seats on the head as well as on the valves themselves. On reassembly of this though, we did actually find that we've got one slight bend on this valve here. So if I put it in and we bring the camera over, you'll see that there's a slight twist on this valve itself there. Obviously got another valve, we're going to lap this valve in as well, make sure we've got a nice mating point between the two there, and get the spring put back onto that one. Obviously the head I would also like to get into paint before we start to reassemble, as a lot of the bolts on this engine I've actually had zinc plated, so once we reassemble with the black and the gold bolts, it should really sort of tie together and hopefully complement all the build that Jonny's putting together.
So when you stripped it down and you inspected it, you knew that a lot of the components could be reused.
Yeah.
We weren't going to replace stuff for the sake of replacing it.
No. And we wasn't going to change the pistons, we wasn't going to go to forged or oversize.
Yeah.
We were going to try and keep it as respectful sort of within a budget, and just refreshing. Yeah. Bringing it back to life, giving it a few more miles.
If you were going to go, like, when would you go forged pistons and all that, and oversize if you were?
If you're searching for over 400 or 500 horsepower.
Right. Okay.
That's where you need to then start building a bit of strength into it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, on the new engines, it's a little bit lower than that. It's over 400 horsepower, but it's these take it really well, and they have done for many years. You'll see this engine in so many different bodies. Yeah. We went racing the other week, and we saw Fiestas there, Clios, MR2s.
With K20s?
All with K20s.
Wow.
It was amazing. You could just hear VTEC constantly, and you didn't know what car it was coming from in a way.
That's brilliant.
It was cool.
That's brilliant. Once you had all the bits stripped and cleaned, then what? Where'd you go from there?
So I went over to Pro Engines in Hatfield to see my friend Neil, and we went through some measurements. So it was measuring up the pistons, conrods, the bearings, and making sure that we've got room there that we can actually work with. Yeah. That we wasn't going to be machining on a part that was then going to get too close to service limit. Yeah. He joined me back in the machine shop where we've left the engine for a few days with Neil now. He's been around and made a few measurements of the block and the crank itself. So the crank we've initially checked for any straightness, and we're quite happy with how true the crank is running. The journals on the big ends and the mains have all been checked for sizing, and we're quite happy with those. So again, Neil's been around, polished these up, ready to drop the crank back into the block and the crankcase webbing there. Obviously the crankcase webbing has also been checked for the size of the journals, and we're quite happy with how that's been. So another final stage of clean up on that, and that'll be ready to start reassembling. Moving over to the block, we've measured up on the cylinder walls for any sort of ovality or wear that's starting to happen, and that has corresponded to the piston skirts. So we take the size off the piston skirt down to certain areas within the cylinder wall, just to make sure that we're going to get enough oil clearance in and around the back of the piston there. Once we've got the pistons measured up, we're quite happy with how the block sits at the moment. So in regards to finishing the block, we will deglaze the bores with a engine dehoming tool, and this will allow us to put a new cross hatching in, which will hold a little bit more oil around the back of the pistons, helping it keep lubricated as well as help reduce oil consumption. Find with a older engine, when the bores start to glaze up, it will allow a little bit of oil to pass past the cylinder skirts, the piston skirts, sorry, and just consume a little bit too much oil. So something when we're refreshing the engine, we will go through and dehone all the bores there, allowing for a little bit more oil lubrication on the back of the pistons. The valve core's out, to be honest. We didn't see that to start with. It was only on the assembly that we saw that.
Yeah, but you said to me, I remember, because we were going to go with new valves, but you said, well, actually, they kind of look all right.
Yeah.
Let's just recut the
seats. Yeah. So we put a 3-angle valve seat on there. So the 3 angles helps with sealing up the compression.
Yeah.
So went ahead the same way as it was assembled.
Yeah.
And yeah, it went quite nicely.
No crank regrinding required.
We polished the crank. We didn't regrind it.
Yeah.
We honed the bores.
Yeah.
So we've got a nice crisscross across the bores.
Yeah.
That will then help a bit of oil retention.
Yeah.
If you didn't have that, could have the tendency for the cylinders to glaze, and then you'd end up using a lot more oil.
So you normally do that when you put new rings in, don't you?
Yeah.
Assuming there's no damage on the bores or on the pistons. Brilliant. Now we'll talk a bit more about the turbo in another episode. We have a lovely dummy Owen Developments turbo that we've chosen for this. The spec of this I will put on the screen, but we will talk about it more when the engine ends up coming to the car and Adam starts to fabricate where it's going to live. This will be the gearbox end, and it's going to sit somewhere over the gearbox. That we do know. But it's good to have a dummy there when you're fabricating. We don't need this engine to go in the engine bay yet because the donor engine is fundamentally the same. The one thing I'm thinking that you won't be putting on today is the inlet manifold.
No, you've got a new one coming, a short stubby one, right?
We need a short stubby one because of this clearance with the front Allegro panel, which is why we've done the relocation of the alternator and the water pump, that sort of thing. So the original inlet manifold is absolutely colossal. It's massive. We knew we were never going to be able to use that. So how long does it take to put an engine like this together for a normal person?
Normal person.
I know I've been cracking the whip a little.
It could be done within a week.
Right.
You know, if somebody was on it solidly for a week, you could probably just about get it done within a week.
Yeah, okay.
I wouldn't really want to. I'd want a bit more time with it than that.
Yeah.
As we have done, we've had a couple of weeks on it.
Yeah.
But that's because it takes time in between painting and machining. You know, there's various waiting times and stuff. So.
And apart from, I know, like you said, we tried to be sensible and frugal and not replace things for the sake of replacing things. But what things did you actually have to replace?
So starting from the bottom, we actually done away with the dual balancer shaft oil pickup.
Right.
So that was quite a big heavy lump that would have been adding a strain onto the engine that came in the FN2 engine.
Yeah.
So we put an EP3 oil pump on there.
Okay.
And in doing that, we've managed to put on a steel sump.
So
you may have a little bit more ground clearance from that as well.
Yeah. In fact, I've seen the original aluminium.
It's a big old lump, isn't it?
It is a big lump.
Yeah. So we've done away with that. We've done the main bearings and the big end bearings.
Yeah.
Then moving up, we've done piston rings. The valve stem seals have been replaced as well. And then, like I said, it's just machining after that. So honing and recutting the valve seats.
Really nice. Really nice. What's the hardest bit?
The hardest bit?
Yeah, I mean,
I'd say the bit I don't like
Yeah.
is pushing the pistons in.
Right.
That's one bit that, you know, as they're popping into the cylinder,
Or in case you damage
in case
them,
you
or-
catch a ring, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the only sort of worry that I get that I don't like, but
Yeah.
it's just a personal thing.
Yeah.
Things I do like about it is once it's painted and peeling back some of the machine surfaces, that's a really satisfying bit. And also when you get the liquid gasket coming out the side,
Yeah.
it's just nice things as an engine build. So I'll start unboxing some of the bits that we've got already. Pistons have been for a clean up, so I'll just lay them down, ready for the new bearings. But we've actually got some new parts in there, which I'll explain about because we're actually going to be ditching the oil pump that was on the engine initially in favour for one of the K20 A2 pumps. Now that's because the original pump on the engine has a balancer shaft in it and we want less strain on the engine now, so we sort of ditch those when we're looking to optimise the engine. Looking over the pumps now, you can see just the size difference straight up, but there's a lot more to turn on this pump here, so there's going to be a lot more inertia having to go around. You can see there that sort of the weight's on the back of the shafts, whereas that one, it's just a direct drive, so it's a lot less to go wrong with that one. But if you have a look there on the back, you'll see the gears there turning, and just underneath all of this, there's weighted shafts in there. And like I say, it's just a lot more strain on the engine having to turn around. Also with the added benefit that once we put the EP3 pump on, we can also go for a slightly lower sump, which will help with some of that ground clearance that we were talking about previously. So on this one, we're going to be using a steel sump in like replacement of the alloy sump. So a lot of the parts for the build that we're going to be using are genuine Honda. Obviously we've got the pump, the windage plate there, as well as timing chain tensioner and oil pump tensioners. But not all of the parts we're going to be using are genuine Honda on this build, some of which are aftermarket, but a very good aftermarket. So we use a company called Jap Service Parts, and the owner Ramesh has spent a lot of time going around to the various factories and manufacturing sites in Japan, visiting the people, getting to know the product, and then agreeing deals to bring those products back into the UK. So we know that the products we're going to be using are really top quality and to OE standard. That's the parts unpacked now, so kind of leaves just the head to move over to now. I'm going to start off by removing the studs and masking up on a lot of the faces here, mask over the face at the bottom there too, and get this into paint this evening so it's got a chance to dry for tomorrow. While that's drying and in between coats, I'm going to be assembling the bottom end. It'll be a dry build, so I won't be sticking it together with any liquid gasket. I'll be going through, putting the crank into place, putting the con rods in, and going through some oil clearance checks. So after a little while of getting the head masked up, it's now ready for a bit of paint. I've got my little makeshift paint booth here, and we're going to be using some Simonized black gloss. So this is a really good tough paint. It's really resilient and durable on the engines. It lasts for a long time as well, and it can be topped up if needed. So we'll go ahead, get this covered up, and can't wait to sort of peel back and start seeing those shiny edges once we've got the gloss back on there. So that's the engine in paint now. I'll start pulling off some of this tape and get it all cleaned up, ready to start going back together. Got the tape off the head. I'm going to go around, just clean up the last bit of the edges, where any paint's just sort of seeped through on the sides there. Get all the mating faces cleaned up, give it a final wash through, blow it all through air, and obviously I've got that last valve to get fitted as well before the head can get onto the block.
I like seeing a car that's gone to salvage because some part of it's been damaged, but there's still loads of parts that are ready to live on again. Mm-hmm. Bringing it straight from the back of the van on the pallet to you. And a few weeks later, seeing this thing that's fresh and ready to rock and roll again.
Fresh lease of life.
Yeah, yeah. I
think and in an old car as well. And that's the coolest bit for me, is that this is obviously a good power plant, but into an old body, just ticks a lot of boxes.
Yeah. Well, and actually to that end, that's the reason why we've gone with this spec, right? Because if you look at the curb weight of an Allegro, it's going to be well under 900 kilos. The original car was, I think, 840 kilos, something like that. So a very light car. Yeah. You know, the FN2 Type R Civic is how many kilos? It's 1,400. Yeah, so a lot more. So the car will have a lot less weight to shove, and that will help it, obviously. But the turbo will help it as well. But I don't want big lag. So I want it to be really drivable.
Yeah. So I think that's hopefully playing to the hands, because with it being a lightweight car, you're not going to want loads of power, otherwise you're just going to sit there spinning. Yeah. You're going to want to use it. Yeah. And actually feel the boost as well. So keeping it short and punchy on a standard engine, I think is going to work real nice. Yeah.
So if you're watching this going, why didn't you go for 1,000 horsepower? Because I want this to be realistic. And 400 horsepower in an 850 kilo car is going to be quite fast, I would have thought.
Very fast.
You got to think about this in realistic terms. You know, these things are what, 300?
306.
306. And how much do they weigh?
They are 1,400, I think. Right. I'm not too sure again.
Yeah. So getting on for 1.5 tons.
Yeah.
When I first dropped off the engine with you, Phil, after we'd had the conversation about doing this, you did say to me, ordinarily, this is a bit old for you now.
Yeah. We don't tend to see too many of these anymore. We specialise in the new FK2s, FK8s, and soon to be FL5.
Yeah.
So yeah, different engine now.
So what sort of stuff do you typically do at Dream? Is it's engine work on the turbocharged stuff?
Yeah, well, anything from bolt-ons, you know, intakes, intercoolers, up to full engine builds. That's sort of what we cater for, and specialising in those models.
Yeah. I'm only asking this because if someone does want an engine of this era rebuilt by Dream, do you want people? No,
it's not happening.
No, he doesn't want people to contact him, unfortunately. But for newer Civic-related matters, absolutely. Thanks for watching this episode of The Late Break Show. Hope you've enjoyed the update on the Allegro Type R engine build. As I said at the beginning, if you haven't watched the previous episodes on my Project Allegro, have a look at those as well. Maybe you want to support this channel via Patreon for a couple of pounds a month. If you want to, you will get earlier access to videos such as this and blogs from me. I'll put a link to that in the description at the bottom. Oh, and maybe you want to buy some merchandise. Again, go ahead, have a look at our e-shop. It's in the description below.